Good afternoon, one and all. I would like to welcome all the listeners, participants, innovators, entrepreneurs, startups supported within and outside Gujarat to the special fireside chat with a special speaker and young VC industry person who has known and seen his ecosystem from the scratch. So I welcome Siddharth for joining today for this special webinar today to address all the young startups and enablers in the Gujarat ecosystem. We also have Mr. M. Nagarajan, the Commissioner of Higher Education and Honorary Executive Director of iHub. Welcome, sir, for finding time to join us. And this is going to be a very interactive session. Siddharth has been a new young face into this VC job.
I think,
but he has reinvented the game altogether. So before I formally introduce Siddharth and have the conversation going, may I now request the M. Nagarajan, Commissioner of Higher Education, to share his initial argument.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for getting Siddharth here in this fireside chat. I think it's a very wonderful lineup to the great initiatives that iHub has been doing in the last few months. It's a very good addition to our effort to create a vibrant ecosystem. I'm glad to welcome Siddharth in this session on behalf of Government of Gujarat Education Department and all the teachers and mentors who are part of the SSIP program in Gujarat, and also all the innovators and students and startups. Today we are going to learn about venture capital because Siddharth Pai is the founding partner of 314 Capital, which is an early stage venture capital fund, and he is a young entrepreneur who is actually supporting other entrepreneurs in achieving their potential and turning their ideas into really sustainable and scalable ventures. So we have started I have started this series of 100 webinar during COVID. We wanted to engage with the startups and provide them a platform to learn about innovation and other things. What started as an interim initiative took a very big form, and we moved on into catalyzing the entire ecosystem. And strategically, iHub is trying to actually orchestrate the entire Gujarat ecosystem to make it more inclusive, diversified, well connected across the value chain to enable the entrepreneurs to move from mind to market, this journey of entrepreneurship. And when we are also doing this intellectual property rights course, which is a very massive effort of training 5,200 people in basics of intellectual property and a certified course. So we will have in very short time more than 5,000 trained people in intellectual property rights. And also we are running the incubation managers program, which is called Nurturing Innovation and Startups Ecosystem. This is also something that iHub is doing to enable the entire ecosystem across all the players, whether they are from universities, whether they are from private universities, or from standalone incubators or attached incubators, or even enthusiastic people who have an interest or playing a role in this ecosystem. So we are trying to cultivate everyone in this so that we are making the pie bigger and let everything building the software part of the ecosystem, which I would say to complement the inherent strengths of all the institutions in Gujarat. So moving in that angle, getting a venture capital person to talk about venture capital industry, the opportunities, the situations here, and what entrepreneurs can do to take advantage of the emerging things. And in fact, iHub's main role is to prepare the entrepreneurs to get the venture to risk capital ready. We can say that is the playing area of arena of Siddharth. So we hope that in this session, our people will be motivated enough to become investable.
Meanwhile, I would like to introduce Siddharth to the entire audience. Siddharth Pai is the founding partner of 314 Capital, an early stage VC fund based in Bangalore with cumulative assets under management over $100 million. He also works extensively on policy for startups and investors, and that's something rare. He looks so young, and he's influencing a lot of policy at the top for startups and incubators and all. So that's one of the things that probably Siddharth has a unique hat for him. He is an expert policymaker for iSpirit. Welcome, sir. We lost you for a second.
Yes.
So Siddharth is an expert for policy member of iSpirit. For those of you who don't know iSpirit is a product think tank for software industry, and they have been very influential in terms of developing India stack in the entire ecosystem around that. The Indian Software Product Industry Roundtable, a Bangalore-based think tank and member of the Regulatory Affairs Committee of IVC, Indian Venture Capital Association. Siddharth was part of the team that was petitioning the government to change the direct angel tax regulation in India, which was the talk of the town in the first initial days of the Startup India reforms and the regulations around that. He's currently working on the list in, I think, in days to come, and also they stay back in India and create value. I think that's an amazing initiative, Siddharth. So young, so much, but so many. So I think that defines you well. And it's indeed a privilege to have you today, to listen to you and all the people who are listening through the incubator Facebook pages. This session is going live on multiple incubator pages. So along with iHub, so all the startups and enablers who are going to listen to you certainly is going to pick a lot of things from your brain. Now, formally, I would like to welcome you to this special session and the fireside chat. We lost Nagarjun sir for a second. He's with us now. So Siddharth, to start with, would you like to a little bit share your journey? You might be also a normal kid like all of us, you know, and have some big American dreams or other dreams. So how did you land in investing in startups so early? How this thing all happened?
Sure, Hetan, I'm happy to. So first off, I would actually like to congratulate the great state of Gujarat for emerging on top when it came to the startup ranking and the recent startup ecosystem report that was released by the government of India as well. I think that's a very commendable feat, especially given the intense amount of competition that actually that's happening amongst all the states to attract and nurture startup talent within the state boundaries also. So anyway, to answer your question and speak a little more about my journey. The thing about startups, startup and entrepreneurship, a large amount of that is actually underpinned by hope and optimism. And in India especially, we've taken up the mantle of startups far more firmly compared to some of the other nations in the world, because a large percentage of our population is actually under the age of 35. In fact, the average age in India is actually about 27 years old. If you actually contrast that with the average age of the people who are starting up entrepreneurship as well, it's actually very close within that range itself. So it actually leads to a very odd dichotomy, where a large number of the people who are actually investing into startups are usually people who have a median age of about 45 to 50. So there's a large age gap that also started creeping into the Indian startup ecosystem, as well as investing into the venture capital ecosystem as a whole, where there was a sort of disconnect between the people who had capital and the people who actually required that capital. And the people who required that capital, which are the startups and entrepreneurs, a large number of them are actually working in areas for which a number of people could not actually find out what the practical use or how that could actually scale up over time. I can actually take the example of Snapchat. When Snapchat was actually created in the US, a large number of the investors didn't actually know what exactly was Snapchat or why exactly would people like an app where you can actually take a photo and that photo disappears within 24 hours. Like most of them couldn't actually figure out. Even when Snapchat went and tried raising VC funding from a number of people as well, a number of people looked at the company and said, like, this is something that's so such a pastime or just time pass. It won't actually become a large enough company. The people who actually wrote the first check into Snapchat were actually people below the age of 30, where they were excited by the prospects of what they actually had to bring up. So we see VC, when it comes to investing as well, age is not tantamount to experience, right? And you actually need to have an open mind and that optimism when it comes to these particular ideas to figure out which are the ideas that can actually scale and what do they actually require when it comes to scaling. And this is why in India, the average age of the entrepreneurs is young, because there's a highly talented pool of individuals who are actually very competent in the skills that they actually have. They know the product well, they know how to market, they know how to hustle, they know exactly what they have to do as part of that. They in turn also require partners and investors who share a similar ethos, who don't mind rolling up their sleeves, and in addition to providing them capital, actually working with them very strongly in building up the entire institution that the company can create, so the company can start actually scaling up over time. So even the role of the VC has also evolved from a purveyor of capital, as well as from purveyor capital to a person who's a partner and actually building up that entire company as well. And in VC especially, the amount of energy required, the amount of legwork you actually had to put in is actually requires people who are slightly younger, who understand the market well, have the pulse of the entrepreneur, and they can actually understand the business better in order to help these particular companies scale up also. Because the moment that disconnect comes, then that new edge of innovation that's actually sweeping through, a large number of people may actually end up missing that. So that's why when we started up 314 Capital as well, we realized some very stark data points about India, where the average age of the person is extremely young. We have more than 50,000 startups who are actually present within the country, out of which 37,000 of them actually registered with DPIIT. And there are a larger number of people who actually work as startups within the entire country itself. And these people are driving innovation, not just in fintech, not just in e-commerce, everyone actually thinks about. These are people actually doing it in terms of drug discovery, in terms of antimicrobial research, in terms of an entirely new generation of silicon architecture in order to run machine learning and AI algorithms more efficiently. We have a wide gamut of people and talent within this entire country. But what that talent actually required was an investor who actually shared that same passion, who shared that same understanding, and who built its own competencies in order to help these companies actually grow up. And that's why when we actually started 314 Capital roughly about 4.5 years ago, there was a similar ethos that we actually had over there as well, where there was a gap. Similarly, how an entrepreneur identifies a gap in the market, we identified a gap in the VC industry that actually required young people who have a strong technical background, who worked as professionals in startups themselves, worked in slightly large corporations. They know how to build companies from the grounds up. They know their technical skills very well, and they actually have to come over there. And the moment you add purveyors or the addition of capital when it comes to it, it becomes a killer combination. Which is how 314 Capital has actually grown from 100 crores in the year 2016 to about 800 crores in 2019, and now we've actually crossed about over 1,000 crores in terms of our assets under management. Just the way the Indian startup ecosystem has also grown on the back of hard work, on the back of young people. Even we've actually ridden that entire wave as well. So it's been a fantastic journey, and a combination of factors has actually come in. And India is the only crucible in the world where the right combination of factors have actually come in to actually allow this. Where there's a young population, they're highly talented, highly motivated, highly skilled and educated when it comes to actually creating these particular technologies, understanding the gaps in the market. Whereas the government has also done remarkable work in terms of easing the policy restraints, in terms of getting capital into the country, in terms of ease of doing business especially for the younger companies and startups as well. And along with this, we actually combine one of Gujarat's greatest entrepreneurs, which is Mukesh Ambani, and what he's done with Jio. We've simultaneously seen the cost of data actually crash across the entire world. The cost of data in India today is lower than the cost of data in any other country across the entire world. And this, in combination with innovation like the Jio phone, with smartphones, the price of smartphones coming down to about 3,000 to 4,000 rupees, we've seen an entire wave of people, a wave of Indians actually for the first time in their lives, enter formally onto the internet. And the very contours and the landscape of the global internet are actually changing because of the large influx of Indians actually coming in. If you've been studying YouTube, I've seen a rise of YouTube. The most popular channel on YouTube is a channel called PewDiePie. As of today, the most popular channel on YouTube is actually T-Series. And the reason why T-Series overtook PewDiePie is because of the large number of Indians who've actually come over there. So India's making its stamp on the entire world stage. And there's a very famous saying, the reason why India can actually do this, there's a very famous saying that's actually floating about the VC and the Indian ecosystem. Silicon Valley can build for the first 1 billion people coming onto the internet. It is only going to be India that can actually build for the remaining 6 billion people of the world in order for them to come onto the internet. And the Indian startup story and the Indian startup ecosystem is actually enabling that. And we at 314, and me especially, I'm very proud to be playing a role in terms of easing policies, my role as an investor, and my role as an ambassador also of raising the entire startup ecosystem and raising the bar when it comes to this.
Wonderful, Siddharth. You actually explained how this thing works. In fact, one thing which you told is very, so you behave like, and then innovated in the process to create a early stage VC fund. I think that was very remarkable, and that was very unique, because it's not a me too VC fund. It's not a me to another check writing machines, but you figured out that you rightly mentioned it's a deadly cocktail of young people understanding technology, exposure to entrepreneurship, and also have appetite to test risk and invest. So I think these are three triangular connections that really makes 314 Capital very, very unique, by the way. So Siddharth, you highlighted how the early stage ecosystem has grown, storage of Snapchats and others have worked. You have closely seen the ecosystem in ways, and at least in last 10 years, you have been very closely looking at the Indian startup ecosystem. You also have invested or co-invested in some of the very prominent startups in Indian ecosystem in the early days. How do you see the journey of Indian startup ecosystem in last decade?
I think what the Indian ecosystem is actually going through is various stages of maturity. Because when the Indian ecosystem started, not many people actually knew what the term startup was or what entrepreneurship actually was. The aspirations of all the people coming out of the IITs, IIMs, engineering colleges, any of the colleges was actually either was to work in one of the MNCs or work in one of the larger corporations. Very few people actually wanted to dare and venture out and actually go and actually try and actually dip their toes into entrepreneurship. And that entire shift started happening, if you actually notice, around 2008, 2009, when the great financial crisis actually happened across the entire world. Even though India was fairly well insulated from the effects of that, the large amount of downsizing that actually came as part of it, and the fact that most of the college hires or the fresh college graduates weren't getting absorbed into industry. A number of people said, in case there's no existing jobs, I can actually use my skill set. Let me actually create a company where people like me can actually come and start getting part of that. So the first and most important thing to happen was that mindset shift, where people actually said, I no longer need to walk on the same old path. I no longer have to graduate from college, work for a large company for 20, 30 years, reach all the way to the top management, and then retire after that. They want to take risks when they're actually much younger. They want to experiment, they want to prototype, they want to iterate, and they want to try new businesses. I think that mindset shift, that was the first and foremost thing that actually happened. And the moment that mindset shift happened, then we actually started seeing the entire startup ecosystem start accelerating. Once a mindset shift happened, people started experimenting, prototyping, etc. And the moment that little lab of innovation actually started, and that's a large amount of this started off in Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, Ahmedabad, Chennai, and a whole bunch of other places in small clusters. At that point in time, a large number of venture capitalists and investors from across the world said, look, in India, we're actually seeing this entire new hub of innovation come up. And these are the people, mind you, who have the technical skills to actually build this up. Just for context, Hiranmaya, not many people actually know this. Close to one third of the founders in Silicon Valley are either Indian or Indian origin. That actually shows the effects that India actually has on the startup ecosystem as a whole. And the reason they can actually do that is because of the fact that their technical skills are extremely high. And because they come from a land where there wasn't a large amount of surplus of capital. So they're very frugal in their mindset. They know exactly how to optimize, how to actually extract the maximum value from the constraint they've actually been provided. So that mindset shift is number one. Number two is what I actually like to call the Indian hustle. The ability of the entrepreneur to negotiate, the entrepreneur to actually craft deals, for them to actually crack these particular deals, for them to take that to fruition and to deliver. That became number two. And number three, what started happening is, as I said, all the investors of the world started looking at India more intently. And they realized several key shifts that were actually started happening from about 2010, 2011 onwards. They started getting accelerated from 2014, 2015. Is that essentially the average purchasing power of the Indian consumer was actually rising. A few years ago, we actually reached the average purchasing in terms of purchasing power parity. PPP, we actually reached $2,000 on a per capita income basis. Now, the reason why the $2,000 mark is exceptionally important is because at that point in time, your consumption patterns shift from primarily subsistence, which is in terms of keeping your heart, mind, body, soul together, to actually moving in terms of discretionary spending. So the spending part of the populace actually started increasing over time also. So we started seeing that particular wave. The fifth wave that actually started coming was actually the rise of Jio. Now, the moment Jio actually happened, and the Jio effect is actually true, that I spoke about previously, is when Jio lowered the cost of data, Jio lowered one of the highest barriers to entry onto the internet as a whole. And the internet essentially reflects the new paradigm of work, the new paradigm of interactions and transactions that the rest of the world's actually migrated onto. The internet penetration in India before Jio and after Jio, you can actually see the statistics, they are stuck. Jio has actually helped get the largest wave of people onto the internet compared to anyone else. And the way he did this was to display the same amount of entrepreneurial zeal that the average Indian entrepreneur actually displays. He noticed he had a high degree of technical skills when it came to understanding the entire market as a whole, because of the previous forays when it came to telecom as well. What he actually understood at this point in time is, look, the only reason why a large population, a large section of the populace can't come onto the internet and start transacting is primarily because the cost is so high. So he invested heavily onto the Jio platform. He actually did this off the Reliance balance sheet itself. He lowered the cost of data to everyone. He managed to get close to 400 million people within 9 quarters onto their platform. And all those people actually came onto that. Whatever they did in the offline world, they actually started transacting that on the online world itself. And this actually created the floodgates for engineers and for people of technical skill to actually start creating apps, for them to start creating products and everything that can actually come online. Because the beauty of the internet is actually twofold. Number one, the cost of a transaction or the cost of access is actually very, very low. And it's completely frictionless and seamless. So there's no logistics, there's no sending something from here, waiting for a long period of time. Everything happens instantaneously on top of that. And number two, the marginal cost of development of anything on the internet is actually exceptionally low. As long as you have the technical skills and you deploy it over there, replication or duplication of that service or that product, the cost of that is exceptionally low. For example, if you have to create a dress or to create a phone, the cost of creating for one phone, the cost of creating a second phone is actually quite similar. But if you actually have a software product, for example, like if you have an app or something, the cost of one person coming onto the app, the cost of 100 people coming on the app, 1,000 people coming to the app, that incremental cost is actually marginal. So we've seen this entire cocktail of factors actually play out. And the Indian mindset was to actually understand the Indian entrepreneur's mindset. This is the edge they have, was to understand the local flavors, or to understand how the Indian way of life, and to actually translate that onto the internet, onto an app. If you actually look at the example I always give with this is actually between Uber and Ola. When Uber's entire premise of actually thing was supposed to be sophisticated, they had those black cars with like an entire chauffeur, clean, seamless app, etc. when they came in. And that worked in Australia, that worked in the US, that worked in Europe, that worked everywhere. Whereas in India, we actually had this plucky young upstart in the form of Ola, who actually came. Ola's edge initially was the fact that they actually understood the Indian mindset better. They understood that the Indian consumer, the level of credit card penetration in India was actually fairly low. So and Uber mandated that you need to actually have a credit card in order for you to actually get onto the Uber app and start using that. Ola's first great innovation was, look, I know this is India, credit card penetration is still low, and this was before the time of UPI, Paytm, and all the wallets, etc. They allow people to transact with cash. That one simple innovation in terms of understanding the Indian consumer actually helped give Ola that edge over Uber, helped it attract a large amount of capital, and helped it become the unicorn and the giant that it actually is today. Like this, the books of the Indian startup ecosystem are littered with stories like this, where there's a young upstart entrepreneur who's actually taken on the largest companies in the world in India. And it's because of their ability to understand the Indian consumer. It's because of what Jio has done, because of all the high degree of technical skills, the fact that entrepreneurship started becoming mainstream. And most of the Indian families became comfortable with their children becoming entrepreneurs. It's a combination of this that's actually that's actually helped accelerate the evolution. So we've gone from initial companies that actually looked at what the rest of the world was doing and aping it when it came to India. So now there are companies like Byju where there are no global comparables to what Byju actually does. We've gone from copying the best in the world to actually creating the best in class companies in the entire world as well. We've seen that entire cycle happen in less than a decade. And in no other country, not in the US, not in China, not anywhere else in the world, have we seen such a large populace come online, such a high degree of churn and change happen within one ecosystem itself, and such a large degree of innovation actually come forth at such a crucial time. And even India's ability to weather the lockdown and COVID-19 has primarily been driven a large part by startups, because startups actually spend a large amount of money educating the populace as to how to actually transact online. They build the apps and services that can actually use online or through our phones, as opposed to using it in the physical store itself. So when social distancing became the norm, our ability to transact and pay and do commerce reduced. Everyone started relying on these particular apps and on these services in order for us to actually weather that. If we didn't have the startup ecosystem, our ability to weather this entire COVID-19 and the associated lockdown would have actually been far worse. So we actually do a debt of gratitude to our startups as well. And they've actually hustled, they've worked, they've created this entire ecosystem for which the benefits are actually are being enjoyed by all of us over here. And this also feeds into another important point, Hiranmay. Our Honorable Prime Minister has actually given a challenge to India to become a $5 trillion economy by the year 2025. And as part of that grand vision, and a large number of entrepreneurs also share that grand vision, a large part of the grand vision was to actually ensure that the new age economy or startups actually contribute 20% or $1 trillion to that as well. And we've actually seen how we've gone from startups actually being close to zero about in 2008, 2009 to actually them contributing $1 trillion to Indian economy by 2025 in the span of about 15 to 17 years. That is the India story. That is the story all of us are living now. That is the story that iHub is actually nurturing in Gujarat, which is why we need more initiatives like you across every single state. So everyone in the country can actually become an entrepreneur. Everyone can actually realize a particular dream and they can actually add and accrete greater value to the Indian economy as a whole.
I think you beautifully summed up. By the way, you are a great storyteller. I must say that, you articulate things so beautifully, particularly not only the stories, but with the articulation that you have. And you rightly mentioned that one of the challenges probably the Indian startup ecosystem had to solve is how do we contextualize it? How do we contextualize everything that we do in Indian context? May it be the investor, may it be the entrepreneur, may it be the enabler. Because that was one thing. You rightly also mentioned that if one third of these founders, co-founders in a better ecosystems are your people, then why can't it happen here? That means it's not a people problem, it's the ecosystem problem, that how the same kind of people can be brought into the loop and get things going. So that you played a very significant role in terms of ensuring that the angel tax and other such issues get addressed, and policy matters. When the Startup India Action Plan happened, a lot of public policies also get created, curated by volunteers like you, and I'm greatly looking at how iSpirit, Sarad, and the entire team is doing. So how do you think there are certain aspects? So now ecosystem has come to an extent. The day before, Rajan Anandanan, we used to talk, and he says that maybe in the next 6 to 8 years, India will see 200 unicorns. That's the kind of potential that we have. Now, to have such kind of possibility in today where we are standing, what are the things that you think our public policy makers need to take into account, both in terms of the people who are aspiring to raise fund and people like you who want to invest? What are the things that you will address?
That's actually a very important point that you brought up, and that's a fantastic question, actually, Herman. Because see, the thing is, a large number of people believe that policy and entrepreneurship don't actually go hand in hand. They believe that the entrepreneurs, everyone are upstart, they should work outside the system. The moment they start getting regulated or they come under the government's eye, that everything actually starts getting stifled because of that. That's a misconception, a very strong misconception that unfortunately a number of entrepreneurs actually share. But what we started seeing of late, and this speaks to the maturity of the Indian entrepreneur, is that they've actually realized, look, the government exists. The job of the government is actually protect all the people and to regulate a number of affairs. We can't actually work outside the system. And the reason why the government actually creates actually policies that seem counterintuitive, because they don't fully understand what's actually happening. There's a very famous joke I always keep cracking every time I go to Delhi, or used to go to Delhi in the pre-COVID times. Now everything happens to VC, of course. To actually go to Delhi and to tell them that Delhi does not know what's happening in Bangalore. Delhi is too far away from Bangalore to understand what startups and all are actually doing over here. But some of those policies actually come out when all of us just look at that and scratching our heads trying to figure out what was the thought process that actually went behind that. And one of the key reasons we realize there's a lack of policy input that actually comes in from the entrepreneur. If you actually want to change government policy, you can't actually go to Twitter and just create a hashtag, say something, and believe that entire thing is going to change. You have to go down to Delhi. You have to meet the bureaucrats. You have to meet all these people. You have to speak to them. And these are all extremely talented. These are all extremely smart people. The moment you go there and actually explain the issue, explain the problem, propose the solution, they will debate with you. They will discuss with you. You'll go through multiple iterations, and they finally come up with a policy that actually takes into consideration everyone's constraints. Like with angel tax as well. Angel tax was actually created in 2012 as a means of actually preventing the laundering of money. There was a very famous politician who was actually convicted on the basis of laundering large sums of money by actually investing at a premium into these shell companies. So angel tax was created that way. But when it started getting misapplied to startups, it took a long time for the government to realize what exactly are these startups actually doing. When I went to Delhi, and I've fought this for close to 4.5 years, and I've actually gone to Delhi on several occasions. At one time, there's a very senior bureaucrat who looked at me and said, I don't understand these startups and valuation. There's one fellow with an app, there's another fellow with an app. One fellow is valued at 10 crores, other fellow is valued at 100 crores. Why? And I was just trying to figure out in my head, what app is this? What sector are they? Who are the investors? Like, whoa, what is the total? What is the market they're going after? What are their metrics? You can't actually give those. It's not as simple as that, right? So it took a long time for them to understand what exactly are these startups. And these are companies who aren't profitable anytime. So they found it very hard to believe that somebody would pour large amounts of money into a company that's not actually profitable. They said, where will you actually get your gains? How will they pay dividends if there are no profits? It took them time to understand these are companies who are actually chasing growth. There's a different business model that actually comes in. They keep reinvesting back into the business, which is why that happened that way. And we actually went and showed them these are companies where governance is governance is actually really good. A moment an institutional investor such as myself actually comes in, one of the first things we always do is we set up an entire governance framework. We make sure they work with the best-in-class lawyers, chartered accountants, company secretaries, and professionals to make sure that everything over there actually comes up to scratch. So the chances of any of this happening is quite low. And a number of startups started dematting their securities to make sure that it becomes completely transparent. So the ability or the concern that they would be used to launder money was completely untoward. Now, which is why the government also took time to understand this, digest that, and they come up with a series of policies that have actually gone to alleviate that. Similarly, what we've seen, and this is something everyone knows, is with regard to e-pharmacy and these apps that actually deliver medicines to your doorstep. Just about in December, there were so many regulations that came up against them. All these people went and actually, the founders of Practo, 1mg, PharmEasy, they all went to the government and said, this is what's happening. We need to actually, please regulate it, but you can't ban it. And the moment the lockdown happened and COVID happened, they became champions. Those are the people braving these lockdown times to actually come and deliver medicines, crucial medicines to you. And now they're being accepted and they're being rewarded and they're being championed by the government itself. So it's important. It's fairly important for the government to also look at these startups and to take and have a consultative process with them. It's even more important for the entrepreneurs to actually come out to the same table as the government and say, look, this is what's happening. Let's actually discuss together what is the best way forward. Here are the best practices. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we believe the regulation should actually come up. Right? You can't exactly wait for the regulation to come up, then go on Twitter or Facebook or something and say something nasty and believe you've actually done something significant. That activity is not an achievement. And that's why it's very heartening to see even a large number of volunteers come onto Icequit and other such platforms to actually start championing these particular causes and actually start taking that forward. Now, with regard to the policy interventions that the government can actually do in terms of improving the amount of capital and making this entire startup system easier. For context, I want to start off the first thing with regard to capital. Indian startups raised 14.1 billion, Indian early stage startups raised $14.1 billion of venture capital funding in the calendar year ending, for the calendar year ending 2019. Out of that $14.1 billion, would you mind estimating how much money actually came purely from Indian sources? Just as a guess. I'm just asking you.
Maybe 30% or something?
$1 billion. Less than 10% of the total money coming into Indian startups is actually coming from Indian sources. Exactly. A large number of people believe a large amount of money. That's not actually true. One of the reasons why a large amount of Indian investors don't want to come into Indian startups, see, they have these preconceived notions that it's risky, it's this, is that. But the moment you find like a Byju, the moment you find like a Licious or someone who can actually scale up, Unacademy who can actually scale up to that, then that entire risk-reward equation actually changes to a large extent. One of the foremost reasons why Indian investors don't actually want to invest into Indian startups, actually, believe it or not, is actually tax. To put this into context, if I invested into the stock market, I can invest into Reliance, Infosys, TCS, fairly well-established companies, long track record, everyone knows they're going to do well. I actually get taxed at the end of 1 year. I get taxed at about 11%. That's my long-term capital gains when you add the surcharge and everything as part of that. If I invest into, let's say, a Byju's, which is an unlisted company, and this was Byju's when I was just starting off, an unlisted company, highly risky. There are no previous financials that have actually been part of that company. These companies will have usually incorporated 6-8 months before the investment actually happens, work for a short period. Your tax rate, if you do actually have a successful exit, is 2.54 times more than the tax rate actually investing into the listed market. That's why all fund managers always joke that it's easier to sell the India story outside India than it is to sell it in India. Because see, and especially speaking in Gujarat, you would understand the business of Rokta, right? Everyone says after tax, how much money is going to come into my pocket? The moment 2.54 times goes, as part of that, let's say, look, the tax man itself is saying, don't invest into these particular companies. Why should we actually do that? On top of that, we used to have angel tax previously. While you get taxed at 30%, the company get taxed at 30% for the money you actually put in. And mind you, Hiranmai, angel tax and this higher tax rate do not apply to foreigners investing into India.
Oh.
One of the biggest things we need to ask, I've brought this up with government multiple times. If you're the government of the people of India, you want us to be Atmanirbhar Bharat, want to be self-reliant, why are you creating so many shackles on Indian capital to invest into startups? Why has it become so hard for us to actually go through that? You keep talking about FDI. What about domestic financial investors? Where is the domestic money also coming in? That's an important component. We want to become self-reliant. We have to start making sure that the Indian capital, that rupee capital actually the shackles on rupee capital actually go. That we manage to actually onshore the offshore. That the gateway to Indian equities and to Indian startups is not Mauritius. It's Mumbai. It's not America. It's Ahmedabad, right? It shouldn't actually be Bangkok. It should be Bangalore. What is preventing our government from actually enabling this policy? We're not asking for special or preferential treatment. As Indians, we actually want to be treated on par with the foreign powers actually coming in. We fought the war of independence to make sure that Indians could be treated as equals in their own country, that we're not subjugated or suppressed in our own country. And this is one of the things that we still bring up with the government. Even IDCA, ISPRIT, a large number of organizations keep going to the government saying, just give us parity. Give us parity with foreign investors, give us parity with listed companies. Because see, an investment into a startup, actually it's a primary investment. It goes into job growth. It goes into job creation. It goes into wealth creation, new asset creation. They go into R&D, goes into all this. Whereas in the stock market, it goes in the pocket of one investor to a pocket of another investor. The company is not actually affected by a stock price going up or going down. They don't actually see any of that money. So we need to incentivize domestic direct investment into all these companies so new jobs can actually be created. Not just a stock market where it's like a merry-go-round and everything just keeps circling in that one closed ecosystem. We need to actually unshackle that. And this is why it's important even for the state governments to also, and for startups, for iHub and others, to actually go to the government and say, we demand parity. We want to create proper systems so a larger amount of capital can actually come into new asset creation, can come into startups, and the economy as a whole can actually grow. We can't tax our way to $5 trillion or startups contributing $1 trillion to the economy. We need to create a system of stronger incentives. We need to actually create parity. So the choice to invest into either a Reliance or in either Reliance or a startup actually remains the same, right? Whether it's listed or unlisted, I should actually base it on the merits of the company and how well the company can actually grow. Not just on the basis of, I pay less tax over here and therefore pay less tax over there. It should be, and it's safer, let me just go there. If it's riskier, you need to actually incentivize people to come in. That's where the government also needs to actually remove some of these policies. They've done tremendous work in terms of Startup India. DPIIT and Invest India have done a large amount of work in easing the friction. We've improved the ease of doing business. It's now easier to incorporate a company to the SPICE form. The IBC's made it easier to actually remove. The restrictions and capital coming in have also gone away. This last part that's left is actually tax. If we can manage to solve that particular tax part, trust me, when the entire pie actually increases, as Mr. Nagaraj was also speaking about previously, when the moment the entire pie increases, everyone's going to benefit. We shouldn't be dividing the same pie into two smaller and smaller pieces. Increase the entire pie, let a larger number of people come, and then you'll actually see the economies of scale actually creep up, even when it comes to tax collection as well.
I think that's beautifully summed up. If you don't increase the pie and make it for all, then nobody will get it. It's not for certain amount of pockets. It has to be as larger as possible. And you rightly mentioned that sometime probably, as you rightly mentioned that freedom is not only for a political purpose, but it also has a knowledge freedom and economic aspect also attributed to it. And therein it is very important how we ensure that, like you mentioned, the startup who used to be abused are now used in the COVID time. So how do we really kind of ensure that we become facilitated to them rather than looking at a policing angle, rather than looking at what damage it will happen. And I think ultimately any startup is earning $1, a rupee, RBI get value out of it. So long as they are doing ethical business, so long as they are doing impact on the ground, we should somehow develop that trust factor. And I think this is very, very important that in our ecosystem, trust is something that needs to be built up, both from a perspective of public policymaker, investor, investee, and other enabling organizations. So there are two important missions you have in your goal, and which are very critical. One is stay in India, and second is list in India. And I think these two also have correlation to what we talked recently about only if we do solve this problem, they will stay in India. Because if we don't stay, we'll just say them back here, they won't be, right? Because they will be looking for avenues and opportunities to go, and you just can't blame them. So certain factors are very essential to see that they don't list in Mauritius, they don't list in Singapore. Of course, there are certain public policy guidelines like you need to be profitable and all these factors before going into the public market. But what are the things that you believe you should start right now so that 5-6 years down the line, the second core of our Indian ecosystem, we can retain more startups in India, creating value in India, and also listed in India?
Perfect. So that's actually a very good question, Ahmed, because we've been working on this Stay in India checklist for a long time. And to the credit of the government has actually accepted a large number of these particular proposals we've had, and they started working to make sure they actually become policies. The introduction of convertible notes as an instrument into startups that actually came from that. Easing the private placement terms for investments into startups came from the Stay in India checklist. Removal of angel tax also came from the Stay in India checklist. Now, see, as an entrepreneur, as you rightly mentioned, an entrepreneur's life is actually filled with friction. It's filled with large amount of uncertainty. There's a high degree of risk. There's a lot of friction when it comes to operations. All entrepreneurs want to make sure that the entire system as a whole in which they operate, and whichever geography in which they operate, has a least amount of friction. So that becomes number one. Number two, they also want to make sure that the area they operate, it becomes easy for them to actually absorb capital or to get invested in. It becomes easy for them to also exit. And that healthy exit ecosystem is actually going to be extremely crucial. And in India, to the Indian startup ecosystem credit, we've seen the blockbuster multi-billion-dollar exit of Flipkart. We've seen White Hat Junior get acquired by another Indian company for $300 million in cash. Nobody thought that would actually be thought of in India. No one thought that could actually happen. Large amount of Indian exits happen through stock M&A, where they issue stock in consider for your shares in the company and take it that way. But we started seeing larger cash exits, and that cash release will actually get reinvested back into the entire nation. So the second plank that's important is to make sure that it's easy to get investments in. It's easy to get exits out as part of that as well. So that becomes number two. And number three, which is also equally important, is that there's a large domestic or rupee or a domestic capital base that exists. So they don't have to keep relying on foreign capital or capital from people who aren't part of this entire nation, who don't understand what's actually happening over there. Because see, it takes local investors who understand local problems for them to see local solutions and for them to invest in those local solutions, right? It becomes very hard, and a number of Indian startups initially had this problem where when they were going to pitch to various investors and all, and one question all investors asked them, who is your China equivalent or who is your US equivalent? If you don't have an equivalent in either both those geographies, what are you possibly solving for? And it's like, India is not China, India is not US. Indian problems are uniquely Indian. We have our own set of problems, we have our own set of solutions, we have our own set of entrepreneurs who can actually do that. So all we're lacking is our own set of investors who can identify all these three things and realize the only thing missing here is capital. Let me actually put more capital in. That's why that third base is important. And see, the government has done tremendous work in step number one. Tremendous work in step number two. We've actually removed the FIPB, made it easier for capital to come in and out. Like I said previously, incorporation of a company, the number of licenses you need. I mean, the number of licenses on some of the state levels is still quite high. But after Atmanirbhar Bharat, when the scheme that they announced for startups, they're reducing the amount of red tape. They're making it easier. They're creating a single window clearance for a number of business models when it comes to it. That's a work in progress that'll go a long way in easing that tension. The third part, which is about the Indian startup rupee capital base, it's actually very, very small. And the reason why a number of our best companies, a number of our best minds are actually choosing to either go to the US or to actually go to Singapore is for that very reason. They're saying, look, if I actually go there, there's a US investor, they're more comfortable investing into a US company. If there are no Indian investors, why should I actually be here? India actually runs a risk of not becoming a land of startups, but a land of subsidiaries. Our best talent, that entire brain drain that's actually happening, it's important for all the government authorities to understand, to speak to all these startups to actually flip or relocate it to another geography, saying, why did you relocate over there? What is missing over here? If it's a rupee capital base that's missing, it's just because public policy and our tax policies prevent and shackle rupee capital from actually coming in. Once they put that away, it goes away to a large extent. Another issue, Hiranmai, is the fact that our Indian financial institutions have so many archaic regulations that prevent them from investing into Indian startups. For example, Indian startups have enjoyed, like Zomato, Byju's, Swiggy, have enjoyed investments from the Canadian Pension Fund, from the California Teachers Pension Fund, from the Ontario Pension Fund in Canada, from Australia Supers, from a number of pension funds, from Berkshire Hathaway, which is an insurance company, from pension funds, insurance company, provident funds, and everyone. And let me ask you, how many startups has LIC invested into? None. How many funds has LIC invested into? Very, very small. You can't even, most of the fund managers also can't actually name them. Our largest financial institutions, our insurance companies, our banks, our provident funds, they can't actually invest into startups because the policies simply don't allow them to do so. If our startups and our Indian AIFs and funds are safe enough for the largest pension funds across the entire world, who are not even in this country, from a different country, who are taking currency and cross-border risk to invest into Indian startups, why can't our own Indian financial institutions actually invest into them? The moment we allow, see, it needs institutional, long-term, patient institutional capital to actually come into these particular areas. Which is why even in Stay in India and the Stay in India checklist and everything, now we're actually working to make sure these companies can actually come in. Through IBCA, we've actually reached out to DPIIT, Ministry of Finance, IRDAI, others to say, let our insurance companies invest into Indian funds. Let them invest into Indian startups. Because there are regulations under the Insurance Act of 1938, which actually said that you can't make these particular kind of investments. And now that's problematic. We can't be bound by laws that were actually written when our grandfathers were children. We have to have laws that are actually written when we are there now, because we understand what those laws actually are and the implications of those laws. That's why it's important for that to happen. And with regard to listing as well, another thing is we actually need a more conducive listing environment. As you mentioned, it becomes hard for a non-profitable company to actually go and list in India. Whereas if you looked at there's a very famous story about Amazon when it listed. In his moment Amazon listed, Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon and the founder, actually wrote a shareholders letter where he said, Amazon will not be making profits anytime in the future. Whatever money we make, we will reinvest back into our business. But I promise you, our business will grow. You will actually become global giants when we actually do this. And Amazon right now is one of the largest companies in the entire world. It wasn't profitable for a very long period of time. But that entire thing didn't prevent them from actually listing, didn't actually prevent them from coming in, which is why even SEBI, I'm actually working with SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India now, through IBC, ISPRET and other such bodies, to actually create a more conducive environment for listing in India. It's called the Innovators Growth Platform, where it allows young tech companies, even if they're not profitable, as long as they meet certain other criteria, to actually list and to actually make sure they can actually go public. Because see, listing is the ultimate aspiration of most of the entrepreneurs. Everybody they've actually seen a Narayan Murthy list, they've actually seen all these great entrepreneurs list. They also want to go list onto the stock market and create their entire vibe. And SEBI is also doing great work in ensuring that while retail investors aren't actually exposed to these highly risky companies, these companies can still go list, so sophisticated investors can actually invest into them, help them actually grow over time, and they can actually become the next giant. Unless we have more companies listing, our entire universe of listed companies is going to keep shrinking over time. Even now, the stock market is actually rising, primarily driven by few. We need fresh blood actually coming in. We need new people coming into that entire market. So those gains can actually be enjoyed by everyone across the entire country. So these are the kind of policy interventions, and these are the three, I would say, pillars that the government also needs to look at in order to make sure that a larger number of companies stay in India. Because the greatest tragedy to the Indian ecosystem is that we may end up being a land of subsidiaries. And this is being a land of subsidiaries when the founders of those companies are Indian, when their market is actually in India. Like a question I always ask entrepreneurs, if you're Indian, your market is in India, your entire team is in India, some of your investors in India, why are you a Singapore or a US company? Why aren't you an Indian company? Most of them don't have an answer.
This is very interesting and very, very intriguing also, because having all the other facets and attributes right in the place, just because we are a missing block, and that actually disrupts the entire game. I think this is very important. So that in the positive time, I'll just take two more questions. One is at the front of 314 Capital, you have done a commendable job in terms of investing very early, and early stage investment is very important in our ecosystem. Done quite a number of success stories. What has been your unique thesis while you scout these companies, and how do you take them through a certain runway to capture maximum value?
Of course, happy to. That's a very good question as well, because see, the companies as an early stage fund, the companies we invest into don't have an operating track record. Most of these companies are actually incorporated, as I said, 6-7 months ago. So it's on the basis of there's very little historic information for you to actually base your entire investment on. Like if you invest into the stock market or something, for example, you look at 5 years track record, look at how the stock has performed, what their metrics are, etc. But here, it's a complete blank slate that you're faced with. And a number of times we've actually met with companies where they've actually come to us with a deck. They come to us with an idea. The company just been incorporated about a couple of weeks ago. We started this idea. Here's what we're looking at. Here's what we're actually doing. So for us also, it becomes hard for us to actually assess all these companies. But what we've done is we created a very large framework within 314 where we actually look at and examine multiple parameters. I can't go into all those details, but the abstract of that is when you're investing into these companies, is first and foremost make sure the founders understand the space they're actually in. Because ultimately, when you invest into these companies, it's going to be the founders who are going to be driving all the operations, the founders who are going to be creating the company, and the founders who can ultimately make or break that company. And if they are in a highly specialized area, you need to be extremely sure that they are very competent and they have the right technical skills in that particular area. You can't have a system where the entrepreneur actually learns on someone else's capital, right? It becomes very hard. It becomes a moral hazard when it comes to that. They need to have that right level of technical skills to actually create that. That becomes the first and foremost. Number two, in the area that they actually operate, what is the sort of moat or what is the competitive advantage that they have compared to anyone else in that area? If it's in an area where there are already incumbent players and people already exist, what are the deficiencies that they've actually mapped out from these particular people in those particular companies or in the market for that matter? And how is this company actually going to go and actually solve those particular issues? Does it have a working prototype? Does it have initial traction from the market? And how they actually battle tested those particular ideas? Because see, an idea needs to survive that first brush with reality. So unless it actually goes against reality, gets a market feedback, they iterate, and then they can come back. Then that becomes the second important plank that we actually look at. The third thing that we actually look at so that becomes a competition. The third thing that we actually look at when it comes to the entire team is, what is the team that the founder is actually building? Because these companies, while the founders are the people driving the entire part, what is the hiring strategy? How can they actually hire the best people within the constrained budgets that they have to make sure they can actually build that entire company out? Because one person can't do the entire thing. Even below the greatest leaders, there's an entire team of people who actually work with them to bring that entire idea to fruition when it comes to that. Fourthly, what we look at is beyond capital. How can 314 actually contribute to your growth and to your journey? There have been numerous deals where the founders have actually come and said, where we realized that it's an amazing space, it meets all our criteria, but beyond giving capital, 314 doesn't actually have a role to play. Because the early stage investor, you have to build these particular companies up with all these people as well, right? So that's what we look at. How can we actually contribute beyond the realm of capital alone? Because the greatness of early stage investing is everything changes hour by hour. Everything changes day by day. So you need to make sure that you have the ability to also adapt and adopt and figure out what the company needs and give them that right amount of knowledge. The worst tragedy for an entrepreneur is to actually have an investor whose only sort of skill set is to actually give you capital. Because we live in a world right now where there's a large amount of capital that's actually available. But that ability and skill to actually help you co-create and co-build that company is actually something that's also needing. So these are in abstract some of the things we have. These are a few of the parameters we actually do examine. We have a multivariate model that we actually sit and slot a number of these companies into, and we actually do that on a touch and feel basis. But that's essentially what we do. These are some of the aspects we take into consideration while by investing.
Wonderful. In fact, Siddharth, one thing I must confess, while conversation with us, I realized that we need more time to touch upon more areas, but because I see a lot of posters on Facebook live and the Zoom, but you are such an amazing, a young entrepreneur, venture capital, industry person, and also influencing policy and having clarity where you want to do. You have the fire in the belly, passion in the heart, and vision in the mind. And so that's how Siddharth summarizes. Siddharth, so one last question to wind up this conversation. What is your advice in the startup ecosystem? What we should do? We have a lot of people having deep pockets, a lot of money around, a lot of things around, but still, as you told, that even not 10% of the Indian fund, Indian countries are contributing 10% of the funds. I believe that would be even lesser here. So what we should do in terms of creating a more favorable, maybe to start with an angel funding ecosystem, but how do you grow this ecosystem from an investment point?
No, I think so. Hiranmai, that's actually a very good question, and this is something that Gujarat should also take. Especially Gujarat's always been the land of entrepreneurs. A number of entrepreneurs also come up, but now I think I actually do get a sense when I speak to some of my other Gujarati friends and all that they feel like Gujarat is lagging behind when it comes to this new world of startups, because everybody believes all these startups are only technology companies. Unless you're an engineer or you're a coder, it becomes hard for you to actually do that. That's not actually true. A number of our best companies actually just use technology as a means of enabling the delivery of a core service. Now we actually look at Swiggy. I'll give you the example of Swiggy. Swiggy is a technology company, but at the end of the day, Swiggy actually picks up food from a restaurant and comes and actually gives it to you. It's a service that they actually offer, and technology becomes a means through which they actually offer that particular service. Byju's as well. Byju's actually helps children actually learn and actually get the best skills they require in order to crack those exams and to actually gain deeper knowledge. Technology, the app, what they've actually built is just a front-end layer and the interaction layer between the consumer, between the startup and the consumer. So technology is an enabler. It is not the end all and be all of your entire problem. And a large amount of technology has actually become commoditized. So you don't have to sit and build an entire app from scratch and everything. You can actually take off the shelf components. You can actually hire a engineering co-founder or hire a firm to actually help you build that and to actually do it. The risk-taking ability that are actually innate to all Gujaratis. They should not let technology be the one thing actually holding them back. And Gujarat's strengths are evident to everyone. They're amazing when it comes to trade, amazing when it comes to jewelry, amazing when it comes to manufacturing as well. And automobiles has actually moved, a large amount of automobile manufacturing actually moved to Gujarat. We've seen the largest automakers in the country also actually set up a large number of plants when it comes to Gujarat as well. So we're seeing electronic vehicles actually come up to a large extent also. And Gujarat can actually play a leading role when it comes to the EV vehicle ecosystem as well, because the manufacturing base exists. The talent base for that particular talent base for the creation of that exists as well. And there are a number of Gujarati entrepreneurs who can actually figure out here are the gaps in the entire market. So they need to have the ability and a platform through which they can iterate, through which they can actually get mentorship. And they can actually prototype and they can actually do it because the risk-taking ability is innate to them. They just need that mental block. I spoke about the India startup ecosystem as a whole, that mental block to say, entrepreneurship, let me actually go there. I don't mind failing. They should not come with a thing like, oh, if I fail, what will happen to me? Like my entire... what will happen to me and my standing in society? It's not like that anymore. If you fail as an entrepreneur, it is not the end of your entire journey. It's another valuable lesson that you actually learn and you take it above. And for the Gujarati investors, instead of only looking at gold, instead of looking at FDs, instead of looking at land, instead of looking at the stock market, start looking at stocks as an alternative asset class as well. We've had early investors into Byju's actually get close to 1000x of their money, initial investment actually out. Right? There's a high degree of risk, but the rewards also are far greater than the risk you actually take. And there are angel funds. SEBI's come out with an angel fund structure. It'll be important for iHub to actually launch an angel fund platform by itself or to partner with some of the others to say, you'll actually launch a specific fund to actually invest into Gujarati entrepreneurs and Gujarati startups. You can actually go raise, even the amount of money that's actually required, it's about 25 lakh commitment over a period of 5 years. You can pick and choose your companies as well. But let them actually experiment, let them actually do that, let them start getting it. And you should have greater trade shows where you have other VCs and everyone actually coming on to Gujarat either through a conference like this or something else and showcase Gujarati entrepreneur, Gujarati talent to all of them. So they can also start investing when it comes to that as well. You should have a pitch day a reverse pitch day where Indian VCs and Indian investors and venture capitalists and AF fund managers can actually come to Gujarat and pitch to a large section of them saying, here's what we actually do. Here's how we built our company. Here's our investment thesis. These are our success stories. Why don't you actually look at investing into these as a long-term asset class? Because see, venture capital, the beauty of venture capital is it's actually a long-term asset class. So even though it's not liquid for a period of 1 to 2 years, you can't come in easily and you can't come out. But when those exits actually come at the end of it, that multiples are actually far higher. If the fund manager does it, the fund managers are far higher than what you actually get in the stock market. And this is very importantly for a Gujarati, because I'm half Gujarati as well. My mother's actually Gujarati, so she's the one who's actually taught me a large amount of accounting, a large amount of frugality, and the way to actually think and approach this, especially when it comes to optimization for that. And she always said, she would make me do hisab. This is a side story. She would make me do hisab for my pocket money. Every time she would give me pocket money as a child, she would make me actually give her hisab right after that and say, okay, if you actually spent only so much, I realized I've given you excess, so you have to return that back. So I actually started using that as a means to test my mettle. So that Gujarati, that Gujuness actually is a very strong asset that you can actually put. So let them get that confidence, let them actually get that opportunity, let them actually see how it happens. And they should actually have like you have Indian Angels, Mumbai Angels, Bangalore Angels, etc. There should be a Gujarat Angels or an Ahmedabad Angels. It sounds like an IPL team, I know, but you should actually get these particular club going. So these people can actually go there, look at the Gujarati talent coming in and say, I don't mind actually taking that particular risk. Because once those champions come up, once those initial pioneers actually are coming out of that entire virtuous cycle will actually start. And the whole state of Gujarat will actually rise because of that.
Wonderful, Siddharth. In fact, we got the secret how to become so early a young investor inspired by your mother, you know. Your pocket money management taught you how to manage the money. Good, wonderful. So a lot to discuss with you, a lot to learn from you, but then there is a passage of time. One question I will take from the audience, I can see. Yes. One is asking, your name of the fund seems to be interesting, 314 Capital. What's the story behind it?
So our last name is Pi. For all those who recollect your 8th-9th standard math, Pi is actually 3.14. So we're actually 314 is like a homage to that. So it's like a tongue-in-cheek joke about our last name and the fact that and what we actually do as well. And that's when they say in terms of increasing the pie, we've actually increased the pie from 2016 to 2020 and look forward to increasing the pie far more larger as time actually goes by.
Wonderful. Such a beautiful answer. Siddharth, it was really wonderful to have you. Given our time, we will definitely again come back to a lot of questions. We had a bunch of questions pulled in, but I can see my checklist. I'm hardly quite done. But then you have some other commitments. So it was a really wonderful conversation with you. This lecture will be available on YouTube. We'll edit it and put in place. All the entrepreneurs will be able to learn from you. And I must say, many policymakers to really draw insights from what you taught in the last 1 hour. And a lot of these things can really pathway and count us in whenever we are able to contribute in stay in India and list in India. And secondly, your suggestions of getting an angel fund listed at SEBI through iHub, we'll do that for sure. And all the other suggestions how to make it forward. So certainly, this is the time that you spend. It's not only spend; it's an investment with the entire ecosystem in Gujarat. Thank you so much, Siddharth, for joining today and having wonderful ideas. Thank you, and thank you to your team for facilitating this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.